Join me, Phil Stepney, and Russell Gerber on an interactive show designed to give you more insight and context to all things African.
And on today's show, the mighty Nile Crocodile. Welcome, everyone. It's good to have you with us. And welcome back, Mr. Phil Stepney.
Hey, Russ. Hi, guys. Good to be back. Had a wonderful safari in Zimbabwe and Botswana. But I'm glad to say I made it back alive and really excited to see how we get on with these wonderful reptiles. Quite an interesting creature indeed, Russ.
Yeah, Phil, it's good to have you back. And yeah, glad to see you weren't sneakily taken by one of these naughty reptiles. But folks, today we're going into all these details about the Nile crocodile. And of course, as always, if you have any questions, do pop them in the question box below and make sure you register if you do want to do so. But we'll be going through all the various aspects of the crocodile. Of course, one of the more common species and big predators that we see on the cameras. And we'll be touching on all various aspects for them. And hopefully we can answer your questions towards the end of the show as well. So without further ado, we're going to get tuck into this particular species. And of course, we're talking about the Nile crocodile. There are actually 3 species of crocodilia on the African continent. This one, of course, the most widely spread. The scientific name is actually Crocodilius nilotica, which of course suggests a crocodile from the Nile region. And the name also tells you the distribution. Traditionally and historically, this animal actually occurred pretty much throughout Africa, all the way from southern Africa and South Africa up to even the Nile Delta. That's much more limited today to more East Africa and Southern Africa and parts of Western Africa. But it's still one of the most surviving big predators on the continent, actually considered least concern when it comes to the IUCN Red List. They are, of course, apex predators and pretty opportunistic, and will take pretty much anything that they can and that is relative to their size. So they're not very picky eaters, which we'll get into a little later on. In this video, we've got a really nice up-close look of this particular species, and just to give you an idea of the various aspects of its body and size. So, Phil, you've just been out there in the bush. How big do these guys get?
Geez, I tell you what, Russ, they're quite phenomenal. I managed to fly over some of the more remote areas of the Okavango Delta, and they look very big even from the sky. I think some of them get up to, on average, sort of 6 feet long. I think some of the biggest crocodiles ever recorded start touching that 20-foot long measure. They get very, very large, especially the ones that you do find in secluded areas. They manage to be the smart, sly ones. That's surprisingly big animals. Sometimes, Russ, I believe they can get into the weight category of a ton. 1,000 kgs of reptile. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's actually what I've read. I must admit, I've never seen a crocodile weighing a ton. More commonly around that sort of 6 or 7 foot mark. But as you said, Phil, in some areas they really are just absolutely massive. And interestingly, quite different in terms of the sexes. You know, the males are significantly bigger than the females, often around 30% bigger. Anywhere from 200 up to 750 kilograms normally, and in the females normally around about the 200 to 500 kg mark. So it's a really formidable predator, and something that, of course, all sorts of animals have to be aware of out in the wild. They obviously are cold-blooded creatures or ectothermic, so they require the heat of the day to keep them active and help them their systems to keep powered up. And because of that, they can also be immobile for long periods of time. And one of the things that's so interesting about them is that they can stay absolutely dead still in the water. They've got a really high lactic acid content in their blood, which allows them to stay pretty much dead still for up to 20 hours in a day. And that, of course, helps them for predation. You know, one of the most interesting things about crocodile is that patience and how they can stay dead still most of the day looking for a perfect opportunity to take something down. And as we mentioned earlier, taking down anything from little invertebrates when they're young all the way through to huge mammals up to the size of a kudu, even crocodile. What's the biggest thing you've ever seen one of these chaps take down, Phil?
Yeah, actually taking down that a big eland was taken down at one point. And then, of course, wildebeest, zebra. Uh, they definitely go for, I would say, as big a prey as they possibly can. Obviously, the bigger the crocodile, they tend to go for bigger prey. But I think we've also seen them attempting grabbing the end of elephant trunks in some cases. Not many limits when it comes to what's on the menu for crocodile.
No, indeed. I mean, those videos of them going for elephants normally end badly for the crocodiles. But it's
Yeah.
actually an amazing thing that they would even attempt to do it. And it just gives you an idea of the audacity of the animal and also why they are so successful. You know, because of that patience, those adaptations to being perfect ambush predators allows them this huge advantage across huge parts of Africa. That basically the only limitation of it being that they need to have water available. But
Yeah, I think
video,
that's a really interesting
Sorry,
trait
Phil.
of all predators, the ability to look out for opportunities and capitalize on them. And I would say crocodiles right up there. And I guess that's one of the reasons why, they quite well considered to be some of the closest relatives from the dinosaur era. They haven't really changed much as far as I understand, apart from their size. They've been incredibly successful just as they are, and I think that has a lot to do with being open to all sorts of opportunities.
Yeah, I think you're right, Phil. About 200 million years ago, I think, was when they first sort of recorded modern crocodiles. So, as you say, they really haven't changed much since then. But in this video, guys, you can actually see here a little bit of a territorial behavior. And crocodiles are pretty interesting, and they'll often share territories without too much problem. There'll be a hierarchy, generally the biggest being top of the pops, and then everyone in size falling below that. But when there are challenges over territory, if you watch carefully here, you'll see what we're talking about. They will often react quite aggressively towards one another and actually chase off, sometimes even kill a potential intruder, especially when it comes to things like food and, of course, a mate. And that's what we're going to get into here. One of the great things about our cameras is that we've got such great access to the water holes, and most of your crocodile behavior takes place at night. Despite that ectothermic nature. But this is a really, really great video, something that I actually haven't seen in the wild personally, and one of the great benefits of the cameras, as I mentioned, but actual mating crocodiles. Phil, I don't know, have you seen this in the wild before?
No, not so much actually, Russ. Also, just seen a fair amount of it here on the cameras, and I guess crocodiles' senses are really sharp. They're way sharper than I often give them credit for their sense of hearing, their sense of eyesight, and so whenever you come up close with a vehicle or whatever, they often change what they're doing. But to see this sort of courtship is quite incredible. And it's probably one of the most affectionate moments one gets to see crocodiles in, generally understood to be, that ferocious reptile. But their courting behavior is quite well documented um, as being very, very soft and quite caring, as we can see here. I guess after fighting off big males and having battles, it must be quite a nice change of pace for them.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, you always expect these big teethy grins on these crocodiles suggest that they're just focused on one thing and one thing only. But yeah, this gentle nature of reproduction is really quite amazing. We often get asked how old they are when they
Yeah,
start
it's something to
mating
look
or
out for
sexual
now
maturity.
at this time.
Sorry, Phil, go ahead.
This time of year. So, if anyone is watching the cameras, so they'll breed now in the beginning of the dry season. It also helps out when they're looking for nests when there's less water around. And the other thing is when they're courting is something to look out for. It's something I actually haven't done yet or heard is actually their courting sounds. The males can be quite vocal and then quite an interesting thing to look out for. I'd say for the next month or two. Let's see who can spot some more regular breeding behavior, just like this.
Yeah, well, as you said, this time of year is such a great time for the predators as things get more and more dry and there's less water available for the prey species and herbivores. So, as you say, it's often great things coming down to the cameras, and just to get, we're going to see in a few moments some more amazing videos that we've managed to capture at the waterholes of reproduction of crocodiles. And just watching these two, as you can see, just an amazing display. We've seen over the past few weeks the cats, we've done a few videos of the cats mating, particularly the leopard, and you think of how violent that whole mating process can be. And the crocodile, often considered so much more cold-blooded, as it were. Very gentle reproductive display. But as I was saying, interestingly, around 15 years old or so, they'll become sexually mature. I know some of you were wondering how long a crocodile will live. So if they're at about 15 or 16, sexually mature, most of them will live to around 70 years old. Some have been recorded a bit older, up to 80 or 90. But that's more unusual as far as I've heard. Phil, I don't know if you've ever heard of older crocodiles. I know there's lots of stories about crocodiles living over 100 years.
Yeah, I think in the wild, I think that 80 mark is probably about right. I think it is quite well documented that one of the oldest crocodiles was around the 100-year mark. This was in captivity, though, so it's a little bit easier maybe to monitor. But either way, they have a very long lifespan. They don't have many, anything to really worry about. They don't have many enemies. There is a question here whether they're actually cannibals. And when they're young, they sometimes do feed on each other. But other than that, in some areas, they've got to watch out for lions or other parts of the world, jaguars. Um, but in general, crocs are relatively safe, as you can see them just lying on the banks, quite happy with themselves. So yeah, that long lifespan, I think that does help out.
Yeah, and here you could see what Phil was chatting about a little earlier in this great video. Female digging away at her nest site. They use their hind legs to actually dig the hole, and they'll, as Phil said as well, they tend to prefer softer sand, not too far away from the water. And because it's generally done in the drier part of the year, the risk of the flooding of the nest is much lower, which is obviously a huge importance to the nest itself. There are other potential threats to the nests, which we'll come to, but for the most part, the biggest threat is flooding of those nests. So that's why you tend to see them doing this in the drier part of the year. You just see her off to the right hand side of your picture if you can't make her out in this video. And she's stopped digging right now, but that is very much the typical behavior you would see. And in this little clip, you can just see, we just wanted to show you a young crocodile. You can see it just coming out the water next to those Egyptian geese. We don't have a lot of footage of the youngsters. They're often very difficult to see. If you consider only about 1% of them actually make it to adulthood, it's not unusual that it's difficult for us to find these youngsters.
Yeah, even when you're out there and you have the opportunity to walk along the banks and that, obviously not getting too close, it's really rare to see the small crocs. This is when I reckon they have their biggest worry. As you say, it's a very low percentage of survival rate or adulthood. Because I think when they're young like this, they've got to watch out for all sorts of things, from herons to sometimes even some of the catfish, tigerfish in some areas, like in the Zambezi, bigger crocs. I think it is quite a tricky journey to adulthood. And once they get to that 2.5 meter length, then they seem to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And with of a nest of around 80 in a clutch, for that 1%, only about 2 or 3 of them are going to survive all the way to adulthood, which is really unbelievable. But as you say, such a huge number of dangers to them when they are small. And one of the most commonly seen, I think, Phil, would definitely be the monitor lizards. I mean, I've seen them digging up a number of crocodile nests whenever they get the opportunity.
Yeah, indeed. I guess their worries actually start in the nest, especially of monitors digging out their eggs. But what I've always found quite interesting about that, not only for crocodiles but reptiles in general, is that concept of having some decoy eggs laid on the top half. Typically, they will lay some unfertilized eggs at the bottom of the nest, then the fertilized eggs in the middle, and on the top again, and hope that if the monitor lizard does get into the nest, that it actually fills up on the unfertilized eggs before it gets to the good ones. So they do try really hard to increase that survival rate. But like I say, it's quite a tricky journey to adulthood.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most interesting stories about crocodiles, those little decoy nests. Again, it's not something you would expect of a reptile. And of course, one of the things we do, or it is more commonly known about them, is that they tend to be quite caring in terms of looking after their hatchlings and the nest. The female will stick by it for the duration, normally around 90 days, and look after and protect it vehemently, and often not eat at all during that time. Looking here in these little clips that we're going through now, this is another young crocodile attempting to take on some giant catfish. And as Phil said, some of these catfish are bigger than the crocodile just about.
Yeah, those catfish do make the croc look small. It's quite tricky from a perspective, but that would be a great meal. Unfortunately for the croc, it didn't come right there.
Yeah, but
Talking
going
about
into the hunting for them.
crocs' food and what they go for.
No, sorry, go ahead, Phil.
Just Yeah, sorry, Gene, you ask a question here with regards to do they eat birds or snakes? And it's quite an interesting one. I've never, or as you say here, you often see birds pretending like they don't have a problem with them, like here, for example. And you get the cattle egrets picking out the bits of meat between the teeth. I would say that a snake crossing the water would be something more likely it could go for, but I've never actually seen them go for birds. And we've all seen, especially on these cameras, all sorts of birds walk right past them. But where I have seen them or seen at least videos or footage is in heronries, when herons are roosting on overhanging trees. There have been some records of crocodiles grabbing them that are on the low branches. I do also know that when chicks are in the nests in these heronries and they are trying to fly for the first time, crocs often do patrol underneath them, like on the Chobe River, for example, in northern Botswana is quite a well-known area for that. So when there's an opportunity, and that goes for anything, I reckon they go for it. But in terms of a direct target, they don't seem to be too bothered about birds.
Yeah, absolutely right, Phil. I've seen that at Chobe a few times actually with the herons. But this is not something crocodiles will generally try and eat. And that's normally the kind of reaction you would get when
Wow.
the hippos and crocs get too close together. And it's often something we get asked about and whether crocodiles would attempt going for the hippos. And because of their size, it's often highly unlikely. There's the potential for a big croc going for a young hippo, but it's almost never recorded. And because of the size of hippos, they simply wouldn't risk such a meal. But there are other threats as well. I know we've showed you this video before, but it's such a fun and interesting thing to watch. You know, potentially crocodiles can be taken by things like hyena out the water if they're not paying attention. I've actually seen leopard take a young croc before as well. Phil, I don't know if you've ever actually seen a big croc taken by anything.
Yeah, I've seen actually lions on two occasions kill crocodile, but on both occasions it happened to be that the lions had made a kill and the croc was actually trying to scavenge. Bad mistake on the crocodile's behalf. And in both situations, the lions got a hold of the croc and they had zebra and lion on the menu. But I have also seen uh, on three different occasions where lions have crossed over channels and crocs have taken the line. So I think in its own space, the croc's the boss. I see this clip is really quite funny. These hyenas not too sure what to do with the croc. It'd be quite an interesting battle.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, I think with these apex predators, they tend to stay out of each other's way as much as possible. And in either's domain, on the land, of course, your big dominant mammalian predators would probably take the prize. But in the water, the crocodiles are boss. And I'm sure many of you have seen that most of the African predator or big mammalian predators are quite anxious of going into the water for this very reason. You know, they are very aware of the danger of crocodiles in the water. It's still easily one of my favorite videos that we've got. These two hyenas. Just having a look here, Suki mentions that we watched a croc grab an impala. The next minute, a hippo waded in and whacked the crocodile, saved the day. Yeah, absolutely. You know, animals can get involved in many different ways, sometimes just from being inquisitive. I've actually seen elephants interrupt a crocodile kill before as well. Um, and every now and again, the animals will simply escape the jaws of a crocodile. It's not that common. They, of course, have a powerful, powerful bite, but every now and again, they'll slip free. Crocodiles have to wait for another day. and these guys are still going at it there.
They're still going for it. That's fascinating. Yeah. You can see the level of excitement in those hyenas with that tail popping up.
But that's kind of what we spoke about, the level of threat that you would see towards crocodiles. They're not generally preyed upon by anything. Their biggest impacts on their populations, definitely man and the reduction of available water sources and water spaces for them. But as I mentioned, because they're such an adaptive animal, all they really need is water and prey and a mate. They're very common throughout the water sources of Africa. And as I also mentioned, of least concern when it comes to the IUCN red list, and in many cases actually used in the farming industry. I know that that's pretty common in a lot of parts of Africa these days for the skins of crocodiles. Not certainly something that I'm too interested in, but it is a big industry in the world. And again, just goes to show the massive success of an animal that has evolved 200 million years ago and is still so abundant.
Yeah, an incredibly resilient animal. We've often seen them when it gets really dry and how they just lie and burrow themselves into whatever mud might be remaining, and hopefully last until the following year's rains. On my trip right now, I was in the southern part of Zimbabwe, and we followed the tracks of a crocodile that moved from one dam to the next. And we were behind it probably for about 2 hours. I think if I remember correctly, it crossed land, including what seemed like a mountain. It was a big climb over a granite crop, but it covered 9 kilometers. Some on the road, some straight through the rocky outcrops, and made its way to the permanent river source. So incredibly resilient, and exactly what this particular crocodile was moving from, I'm not sure. It went from one perfectly good body of water to the next, but I suspect it might have been a male didn't want to deal with high pressures in a small dam, and maybe was looking for more peaceful environments. But they deal incredibly well with the space they find themselves in, very resilient. And yeah, so therefore it's not surprising that they're not on a endangered species list. Um, quite an incredible animal.
Yeah, as you say, Phil, that estivation, when they actually do find or make themselves a burrow and keep themselves in a little damp spot for months at a time if the water dries up, is just another of the amazing adaptations of crocodiles. And certainly something that, as you say, has made them so successful. And of course, has given it their bad reputation because of their success. They come into contact with people a lot in a dry continent for the most part, like Africa. Of course, your populations are generally concentrated along river sources, and over time they've developed bad reputation, particularly Nile crocodiles, as more aggressive species, which is not really warranted. They'll generally keep to themselves, but as we mentioned earlier in the show today, they tend to be very broad-based diet and extremely opportunistic, and sometimes they do come into contact with people and those accidents can happen. So certainly a dangerous animal, but much more interesting and certainly a much more caring parent than what many people realize. There's another young croc there in your picture if you look carefully towards the bottom of your picture. But Phil, I don't know if you've got anything more to add in conclusion on these crocodiles.
Don't go swimming in the Olifants River.
Words to live by, I think.
No, Thanks a lot, Russ. Yeah, it's a really intriguing animal to discuss. Some great footage on the cameras. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's always nice to have you and all your questions. And I'll catch up with you tomorrow on the afternoon show.
Awesome, Phil. Thanks for joining us again. It's great to have you back, and to all of you out there for joining us on the show to chat about crocodiles. If you guys have any questions about crocodiles, you can always send them through to us on the Ranger shows anytime, or get in touch with us on the Facebook page as well. But thanks as always for joining us, and to the production team, Max, and everybody involved. It's always a pleasure. We'll see you all again soon, and have a great weekend. I'll be back next week, and Phil will be back tomorrow for his show. So cheers, everybody. Ciao for now.